Um, so I'm sorry for this in the side over here, just that there's only a plug over there, so let me use the crane here next to heart. The topic you know is 7 historically significant women you've probably never heard of. I've tried hard to find women you've never heard of. If some of you have heard of some of them, I apologize. So let's begin by seeing who we've heard of and who we haven't heard of, and then we'll take it from there. So, who's that? You should know.
Oh, that's from that book, Rivka.
Yeah, that's Rivka, exactly.
I know.
That's Kindle Rivka. You've probably heard of her, so let's go on to the next one. You can't see the pictures well, but it's a Tzvus Hashem illustration. Anybody? All right, that's Yehudis, who's about to slay the general. We know about her too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Who's that? Yeah, this is Sarah Schneer, the founder of Beis Yaakov. Heard of her? Good, okay. Next. You can read who this one is. Gotcha. This is Menachem son and buried in Hebron. Heard of her? All right, skip that one as well. Who's this? And this is the last one of this. You probably have heard of her too. Possibly. No. This is a woman who's the one in the middle here. I guess there's other women as well. That is Mumma Sarah. She was known, Sarah Katznelavogen, who was, for a time, probably the leader of the Chabad underground, illegal underground in Russia, who was instrumental in saving probably thousands of lives, sending them out of Russia, and she ultimately died in Soviet prison. Sounds familiar? Okay, since these are all familiar, these ones we're not going to talk about. So who will we talk about? But we have to look very far. So the first one, first person in our presentation, we're going to go in order of chronological order over here. So Shlomtzion Hamalka. Some of this is in Hebrew, some of it's in English. You'll have to excuse me. Queen Shlomtzion, who was, well, she also had a Greek name, as you can see over here, which is Alexandra. And she was, as her name tells you, a Malka, a queen. And let's talk a little bit about her. So her years is 141 to 67 BCE, which puts her in the second half of the second Beis Hamikdash. As you may recall, during the Hanukkah miracle, so there was the Maccabees, who were Kohanim, who took over and became the rulers. And then they did something which they should not have done, and that was that they became the kings. And they were not supposed to be kings because Jewish kings have to be from which Shevet? Sorry, I didn't hear you. Mr. Someone said, you heard that?
Yeah.
It's hard to talk. I know, I'm only without food over here. I should just answer my own questions. And they're from the Shevet of Yehuda, and the Maccabees were from which Shevet? Levi. They were Kohanim. They should not have become the kings. Well, among those kings, this Shlomtzion was apparently not born into a royal family. She was the sister of Shimon ben Shattach, who was probably the leading Talmud Chacham of the time, or among the leaders certainly. But she got married to the king Aristobulus. When he died, she married his brother, probably performing Yibum, where if a man dies without children, his wife marries his brother, possibly not. But then she married Yanai, his brother. They were both pretty bad guys. Most of the kings of the Chashmonaim, the descendants of the Maccabees, were bad guys, ruthless, often siding against the Chachamim in whatever politics and intrigue was going on. They were bad guys. Then her husband died in battle, and she took over. She is probably the only Jewish queen to reign. There were many queens. All the kings had queens. But she was the only reigning Jewish queen probably in Jewish history. To just put her in context of it, this is talking around 100 and something years before the Beis Mikdash is destroyed. And when she took over, things took a drastic turn for the better. Her husband, or perhaps her husbands, had persecuted Talmidei Chachamim, killing most of them. In fact, she just managed to save the life of her brother, Shimon ben Shattach, but not many others. When she took over, so they had persecuted the Prushim, which was another word for the Talmidei Chachamim. She made peace, and at that point there was big rivalries of who's going to be in charge of the Sanhedrin. Will it be the Chachamim, or it will be the Tzedukim, who had a different approach to Torah, less orthodox approach to Torah. She put the Chachamim squarely back in charge, which was a good thing. And as a result, we know that if we behave in a proper way, in a ruchniistic way, this results in proper gashmias, and therefore we see, this is a quote from the Gemara, which is Ma'aseh b'mei Shimon ben Shetach. It was a story told that in the days of Shimon ben Shetach, b'mei Shlom Tziniya Hamalka, the day of Shlom Tziniya the queen. Her name is often spelled in many different ways, but it's the same person. Shahayu Geshamim Yerid L'Leilei Shabbos L'Leilei Shabbos. The rain would fall from Friday night to Friday night, and this was the proper time, a convenient time, the right amount of rain. Ad shenasu chitim k'kliyos, until the wheat were so big they were the size of kidneys, which is, I suppose, very large for wheat. And the barleys were like olive seeds. And their lentils were like golden dinarim. And the Chachamim gathered them up, and they set them aside as a model for all generations, which would come after them, to make known how much sin causes. In other words, they look what the time when the Yidden were doing the right thing. Look how wonderful the fruit of Eretz Yisrael were, and now look what you have today. And this would be a living model telling everyone what they could have if they would only not sin, like in the days of Shlom Tzion the queen. So in her times, we see that it was a good time physically and it was a good time spiritually, both. And indeed, her 9 years were probably, it's hard to judge, but they're considered to have been the best. The 9 years that she reigned were probably the best 9 years of the whole time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Unfortunately, as many kings, towards the end of her life, there was intrigue among her children, and she maybe they would have killed her, but she died first. So she died as queen, but it wasn't the perfect happy ending. So she was kind of a bright spot amid a very dark series of kings before her and a very dark series of kings after her. So that's number one. Moving on to number two. This is the mother of Abaye, who was the wife of Rabbi Bar Nachmani. Who is she? So we don't know much about her life, but we know a lot about her teachings. Abaye is one of the most important people who are quoted very often in the Gemara, in Talmud Bavli. He lived in Bavel. He often comes together with his friend, which is Rava. They often disagree with each other, or agree, but in any case, they're often quoted together. They were a pair. And Abaye has a lot of very interesting quotes from his mother. So we don't know her name, but we know things that she said. I would say there's, I don't know a number, but let's just guess in between somewhere in the, maybe 2 dozen or maybe even 3 dozen teachings in the Gemara from her. Most of them are medical remedies, which I don't advise that any of us try at home. They are a little bit, but some of it is not. Our first quote from her is as follows. Amr li aim. He always starts these quotes the same way. Amr li aim. Mommy told me. And what did he tell her? Bar shis l'mikra. A 6-year-old is old enough to learn mikra, to learn chumash, or Tanakh. Bar eser l'mishnah. 10 years old could learn Mishnah. Bar tleisa l'tanisa me'es la'es. When a boy is 13 years old, he's old enough to start fasting for a whole 24-hour fast, for Yom Kippur, or Tisha B'Av. And for a girl, she's old enough at 12, which is something that we're all familiar with. Everyone knows that, you hit bar bas mitzvah, you begin to fast. This is where this is a quote of hers. Another quote that also has, of all her quotes, I tried to pick 2 that actually have ramifications in halacha, because, as opposed to these, far out quotes that don't tell us very much about what we can actually do in our lives. Another one is like this. Amar Abaye. Abaye said, again, Amar li ain. My mother told me, Hayanuka de sumak, if there's a child who is yellowish greenish, and I'm sorry, he's red. He has a reddish complexion. Let's just go to that side because we'll spend too much time on the quotes. If a child has a yellowish complexion, wait until you give him his bris. And so too, if the child has a sort of red or yellowish greenish, which we would know as jaundice, you should wait till he has a bris. So that kind of thing that we all know, take it for granted, that it's very unhealthy to have a bris if the child is of the wrong color, specifically yellow. Again, if you trace this back in the Gemara, it traces back to this anonymous woman who is the mother of Abaye.
Did she have a reason for it? Was there like a reason?
Her reason, I think, ends there. There's many other reasons in discussions which are certainly beyond me. But
No,
yeah,
a
she did say.
pediatrician told me that, like, medically there's no reason, so I'm
Yeah,
just
so
curious where that always came from.
So when she describes it, she says it has to do with, remember, okay, we're going to lose time here, we'll go very fast.
Okay.
In the olden days, they basically viewed medicine as being a balance of 4 humors, right? And each one having a color. And if your colors are off, it's because you have the 4 liquids, your humors are off, right? Good humor means you have the right temperament of your humors. And apparently there's too much blood, too little blood, that's what's going on over there. It's a balance of the humors.
Okay.
All right, last one of her quotes, and that is Amr Li'ain. He says, my mother told me, Hani Kasani, roasted wheat or roasted grain, Malu Laliba are good for your heart, Umevatli Machshavta, and they will get rid of bad thoughts. So if a person needs, I guess, something for their heart and something for depression, apparently she prescribed grain, roasted grain. Now, the Gemara asks, who is this lady? And asks as follows. So it's going to come a little in a roundabout way. The Gemara says as follows, about someone totally different. Rabbi Yochanan, story about Rabbi Yochanan, Ki Ivratzai Imai, when his mother was pregnant with him, Meis Aviv, his father died, Yiladatai Meisa Imai. When she gave birth to him, his mother died. So he was a complete orphan by the time he was born, Rabbi Yochanan. V'chein Abaye, and so too Abaye. Abaye also was an orphan when he was born. What's the question you're all going to ask? Yeah, he has all these quotes from his mother. He never met her. So the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, Amar Li'ain. How could that be? Abaye often said, my mother told me. We have so many of those quotes. And the Gemara explains, Hahi Marvenise Havai. She was the woman who raised him, his adopted mother. So this Aim, whom he quotes as his mother, was his adopted mother. And this we know about his life story. Abaye is interesting. His real name was really Nachmeni. And he was adopted by Rabba Bar Nachmeni, who was his uncle. And for whatever reason, perhaps because Rabba didn't want to refer to his child as with his father's name, not being Kibbutz Avayim, or for whatever reason, he was called Abaye instead. So this fits with his life story as we know it. All right, that's number 2. We're going to skip many, many years, more than 1,000 years. We're going to talk about someone who was very different. Until now, I guess both these people were people who were examples of what Yiddishkeit could and should look like. And here we're going to take a little trip. This is someone called Esther Brando, who is famous because she came to Quebec City in 1738. As you know, or you may know, where we are now was once part of French territory, right? That's why Chicago was a French name. Much of North America was French territory, called New France, and France was a Catholic country, and because it was a Catholic country, they had a rule that no Jews would be allowed to live in this territory called New France. She came to Quebec City, actually disguised as a ship's boy. She came dressed up, A, as a boy, B, as a non-Jew. She snuck into the country, or the territory rather, at a time when only Catholics were allowed to live there, and she was discovered shortly thereafter. And she was discovered, and they began to interrogate her and ask her questions. And remember, those of you didn't come with a passport. There's no documentation of who you are. So everything we kind of know about her is based on her own testimony, and she seems to have been a little bit flaky. So it's hard to know if what she says is true. But she had these stories about how she was from France, and her family was on a ship, and they were shipwrecked on the way to Amsterdam. And she was taken in by a non-Jewish peasant who fed her non-kosher food. And she decided to kind of adopt a non-Jewish lifestyle. And then she decided to dress up like a boy and take a whole lot of jobs as a boy, and that's how she got to France. That's how she got to New France. But once there, they gave her a choice: either you convert to Catholicism, or you're on a ship back to France. And she managed to kind of drag up for a year, trying to remain in New France, but she ultimately refused to convert, and was therefore sent back on a ship to France. And I think that the lesson from her is that although she was very far from probably what we'd look at as an ideal example of Ahavas Yisrael, at the end of the day, she, with probably keeping very little Torah mitzvahs as we know it, still, when push came to shove, refused to convert to Catholicism and instead went back to France. Next person, we're up to number 4, is Tamaril or Tamaril Bergson. Who was she? Well, to start with, she passed away in 1830, so you can imagine that she lived during the turn of the 18th century. And she was famous really for being one of the most instrumental people of bringing Chassidus into Poland. She, as a person, was extremely learned. She wore tzitzis, it was said, and she learned Gemara. She came from a wealthy family. She married once to a person who passed away quite young. She married a second time. Her husband's name was Berke, hence the name Bergson, which is the name that her children adopted, the children of Ber, and somehow that became her name as well. And they were a wealthy family, even after, it seems like she was as involved in the business as her husband was, if not more. And they gave tremendous amounts of tzedakah everywhere, and she in particular focused on giving tzedakah and furthering the cause of Chassidim. In fact, the Chayza of Lublin called her Reb Tamarol. I guess there is no real, in Yiddish, honorable, there's no equivalent in a female form for an honorable woman. So he would call her Reb Tamarol. I don't know if she's the only person, but that's what he called her, Reb, as an indication of what high esteem she was held by everybody. And she didn't just give tzedakah, she would also give people support. Many prominent Hasidim of Poland and people who were Rebbes or future Rebbes actually worked for her. So she gave them jobs and honorable jobs. In fact, just a little story that kind of shows this is that there was a famous Rebbe called Reb Simcha Bunim of Shishcha. Reb Simcha Bunim was unique among Rebbes in that he wasn't your typical Rebbe. He didn't dress like a Rebbe dressed. He was a pharmacist, and in those days prescriptions were all written in Latin, so he was conversant in Latin. He was different. But he was a very, very well-regarded Rebbe, for good reason, obviously. And the story is that one time he came to his Rebbe, the Chayz of Lublin, and told the people used to come to the Chayz after Yom Kippur and ask him, what's my year going to be like? Assuming that the Chayz had seen, called the Chayz because he was able to see things. So what's my year going to be like in this coming year? And he asked the Chayz what his year is going to be like. And the Chayz said, this year you're going to lose all your money. And sure enough, his wife became ill, his children became ill, and they were cured eventually, but it took a lot to get there, and he lost his fortune as a result, or whatever he had, I don't know if it was a fortune. He lost his money as a result. Attempting to kind of regain his footing, he went to Warsaw, checked into a hotel, a nice hotel as you would have normally checked into as being a prominent businessman. And he began to look for opportunities in Warsaw. And days passed, and he couldn't find any opportunities. And one morning, the waiter comes to him, knocks on his room, and says, "Would you like to have your daily serving of goose, which is a delicacy?" And he just felt so bad, so terrible. What am I going to do with goose? I can't afford to pay my bill. How am I going to afford to pay for my bill with goose for the morning? And he was just so sad about it that he, burst out crying, davening to Hashem that he should be saved from this situation. Shortly thereafter, there's another knock on the door. It is a messenger from Tamarol, who says, "Would you like to come work for him?" Now, parenthetically, there were certain Rebbes who refused to work for her on principle, just because we're not going to, we're going to rely on Hashem, and we're not going to. It wasn't anything against her. It was more a matter of self-reliance and not wishing to become, gain off someone else's generosity. But she asked him, "Would you like to work?" She sent him a message, "Could you work for me? And this will be your weekly salary." And he recognized, okay, if I'm getting an opportunity, that means that this gezerah against me is probably over, but I need more than just this much money to live off of. And so he sent back a message to Tamarol saying, "Thank you very much, but I'd like to become a partner." She got the message and said, "Thank you very much, but I'm not hiring partners." And so he continued to wait in the hotel room to see what was going to happen. Davened and cried some more and asked Hashem to, help him. And shortly thereafter, he received an offer for some kind of partner position in her company. And sure enough, it was very lucrative for him and for her, and everyone did well. He came back to the Chayza and told the Chayza what had happened. And the Chayza said, "You should know, when I had seen earlier that there was in your fate that you were going to lose all your fortune, that was right. It's only that it's only that when you cried to Hashem asking to be saved, that what tears can accomplish, even things which truly aren't supposed to be there for you, then happen for you. And as a result, fortune that was not supposed to be yours is now yours." And that was just a parenthetical story which kind of tells you where she is in the picture. She's very much in the center of these people who are really at the leaders of the Chassidus in Poland. Right? She was among the first 3 Jews to own an estate in Poland. She was granted special permission to live outside of the Jewish quarter in Warsaw. In fact, one of her children married a grandchild of Shmelke of Nikolsburg, who was one of the greatest Talmidim of the Maggid Mizrich. So she wasn't just kind of a wealthy supporter, but actively, someone who they obviously felt comfortable with and honored with to, marry her children, etc. Her husband always, retained a full beard and payas, and they were really, among the wealthiest Jews, and still all that. All right, that is Samuel Bergson. That was number 4. Number 5. We have 5 minutes to go. We'll have to move. All right, Malka, Rebbetzin Malka of Belz. Belz, if you'll go to Belz today, I've never, the Belz in Yerushalayim have this very giant shul called the Belzer Beis HaMikdash because it's so big and white and fancy and shiny. And in the Belzer Beis HaMikdash, if you go there on a Friday night, so the Rebbe has a tish Friday night, and the Belzer Rebbetzin is also there giving bracha. She wears this very big fancy kind of crown. Kind of unique among Rebbetzins is that in Belz today, the Belzer Rebbetzins give brachas and are leaders. And that's something that really began with the very first Belzer Rebbetzin, who was a very interesting person. This is her gravestone over there. I don't think you can read much, but that's what it is. Her name was Malka. She was actually a first cousin of the first Belzer Rebbe, of Shalom Rekayach, who was called the Sar Shalom. And Sar Shalom went to learn as a young man from his uncle, who was her father. And eventually the shidduch was made, and she married her father's star pupil, who was her first cousin. And when he became the Rebbe of Belz, she became the Rebbetzin of Belz. It seems like they actually learned together, and she was very instrumental in his learning, doing things like helping him stay up all night. It said that he wanted to stay up 1,000 nights in a row learning, but it's hard to stay up 1,000 nights in a row learning. So she actually made the commitment to stay up with him for those 1,000 nights learning, which is not something that many of us would do. In fact, he famously said about her, so 2 weeks ago in the parasha, it said, Malki Tzedek, Melech Shalem. Right, Avraham Avinu, after he saved the people of Sodom, he went to Shalem, which is Yerushalayim, and there he met Malki Tzedek, who was really, anybody? Who's Malki Tzedek? He was really Shem, and Avraham Avinu met Malki Tzedek, Melech Shalem. So the Belzer Rebbe used to read this pasuk a little differently. Malki Tzedek, because Malka is a tzadekes, therefore Melech Shalem, therefore Shalem, meaning me, is a melech, I'm a king. So how did I become a king? How did I achieve whatever I achieved? It's all because Malki Tzedek, because Malka is a tzadekes, which kind of tells you how he esteemed her. As a result, it's not surprising that she was actively involved in running Belz and making decisions and giving directives. She didn't just make the kugel, but she was very much a part of whatever was going on over there. Till this very day, the Belzer girls' schools all over the world are named Bnei Malka, Beis Malka, named after her. In England, they joke that the reason it's called Beis Malka is because it was always paid for money by the Queen of England. But that's the fact. It's all named after her. And she passed away in Ches Elul, 1853. And until this very day, her yahrzeit is observed as in Belz as a significant day, which I guess we take it for granted that, something which the Rebbe did really, that the Rebbetzins yahrzeit became such a big deal. But until then, I don't think you see that in Chabad or other places, that the Rebbetzins yahrzeits are very much observed or known. But she was, I guess, unique among Rebbetzins. Here we have, that was number 5. 5? All right, we have 2 minutes left. Okay, this first, our next person is Chana Rachel Veremacher, who's called the Psula Meludimir, the Maiden of Ludimir. She was extremely controversial. She lived in the city of Ludimir, as you can imagine. There's lots of stories about her birth and her life, widely fluctuating, and which tzaddik gave a bracha for her birth, and putting her birth and her death within a pocket around a dozen years in this direction, a dozen years in that direction. So we don't know a lot about her in fact, because it's just you could read everything, and I don't know what's really true. What is true is that she lived a life of kedusha, learning, teaching, and giving brachas. really functioning as a Rebbe, not as a Rebbetzin, but as a Rebbe, doing everything that Rebbes in her day did. She was unmarried. She would sit behind the mechitza and teach Torah, which everyone, including men, would come and listen to. And there were all kinds of stories of nisim and brachas that were being fulfilled, and it was becoming a very big deal. It ruffled a lot of feathers, as you could imagine also, until Reb Mordechai of Chernobyl, who according to some gave a bracha for her birth, it depends which version you're going to believe, kind of encouraged her to get married. There's very little known about this marriage, except I once read somewhere, I was not able to find it again, some researcher who traveled to Ludmir just recently and found people who are her great-grandchildren, which tells us that she had children from that marriage, although that wasn't known. But shortly after that marriage didn't last, she moved to Eretz Yisrael, lived in Yerushalayim, and continued to live this Rebbe lifestyle, never quite attaining the same greatness and aura that she had previously, but going to the Kaisel to daven with a group of ladies, leading monthly trips to Kever Rachel, her name is Rachel, and kind of living this, Rebbish lifestyle in a certain sense, but never quite as it was previously. Last person, I believe, her name is Tova Kaplan, and she was known as the Green Rebbetzin in America. If you just came recently for Poland, you were known as green. You're green, right? You haven't yet ripened. In English, called greenhorn, but in Yiddish, a green means someone who just come from Europe. She was called the Green Rebbetzin because even after living in Canada for decades, she remained green. She never quite acclimated to Canadian life. She probably never learned English very well. This was her and her husband. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Kaplan. I don't know what kind of rabbi he was, but everyone says he was a rabbi. I don't know if he had a shul or he just was a Talmid Chacham of whatever. She was his wife. She realized that at that time there was no facilities for women to give birth in. Jewish women in Canada, whatever there was not hospitable to women. They weren't serving kosher food or otherwise being hospitable. So she actually went door to door in the freezing cold Montreal winters and summer, it didn't matter. And she collected $7,000, which then was a huge amount of money to collect in small donations. It took her years. And she founded the Hebrew Maternity Hospital in 1916, which at that point some other donors kicked in and helped it reach the finish line, but she was the person who did it. And then she realized that she had to do something more, and that was that there was a hospital for women who wanted to give birth in the hospital, but there was no hospital once they were born. There was no Jewish hospital where Jews were welcomed. I don't know how welcome they were in other hospitals. And 15 years later, the Jewish General Hospital opened up in Montreal. It was a very large, still is a very large hospital, welcoming to Jewish people. Kosher food is being served. There's a shul there. There's a special bris room, facility where people can hold the bris. Everything you need, the Jewish General Hospital. Till this very day, it's still there. It looks like this now. It's undergone many expansions. It's one of the biggest hospitals in the city, and it was founded by her. Throughout her life, she refused to take any honor for it. They wanted to, name a wing after her. She didn't allow them to. They wanted her to be the president of the Ladies Auxiliary. She wouldn't do that. Member of the board, she wouldn't do that. She raised the money and then just, preferred to stay behind the limelight, and that's the way it was. And that is the last of our 7 women you've probably never heard of. Did you probably never hear of them?
Never heard of any of them.
Good. All right. In that case, we succeeded. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi Posner, there's water for you here if you want.